North Korea's Kim Jong-un rattling his saber again. What does he want this time? North Korean leader Kim Jong-un this week called for the country's military, nuclear forces, and its munition industry to step up preparations for a war with the U.S. over what it views as the U.S. confrontational actions. Kim's statement was made when addressing the annual Workers' Party of Korea meeting. The statement was a comment for a domestic audience of party loyalists asking for ever greater sacrifices, but also was directed to an international audience in another apparent plea for attention. These types of threats from North Korea are not unusual coming from the Hermit Kingdom, but what is behind this latest round of North Korean outrage? It is agreed that North Korea, since at least the 1970s, is seeking two long-term goals. It wants economic relief, and it wants physical security. North Korea, since its founding after World War II, has been hampered by U.S. sanctions, even before the Korean War of 1950 to 1953. The sanctions have become ever tighter as North Korea finds ways around the sanctions, and it takes actions that are contrary to the UN resolutions or U.S. security concerns. Examples include nuclear weapons development, ballistic missile tests, counterfeiting, stealing of intellectual property, kidnapping of foreign nationals, assassinations, and conducting an illicit arms trade with some of the world's worst actors. North Korea is in a position that an illicit trade is needed to bring in hard currency, which is needed to keep the arms industry and secure the Kim's position of party leadership integrated into North Korea. It's the personality cult of the Kim dynasty. The reason it needs to act illicitly, especially after the fall of the Soviet Union, is that the tight sanction regime against the country keeps it from operating within the normal world economy. The North Korean national goal for complete self-reliance and the lack of trust due to the disruptive behavior between North Korea and the international community make it extraordinarily difficult to bring about an international economic relationship between the world and North Korea. The lack of trust is keeping either the world community or North Korea from taking that first substantive step. The other issue is North Korea's desire for physical security, and this desire has the same chicken before the egg conundrum as the economic issues, but is much more dangerous. If there is a long-term sticking point for the North Korean security concerns, and there are other reasons, it is the stationing of foreign troops, mainly U.S. forces on the Korean Peninsula. North Korea, through its three Kim dynasty leaders, have a position that the stationing of foreign troops threatens the existence of the North Korean state. However, the last time there was a withdrawal of foreign forces from the Korean Peninsula in 1949, the Soviet Union left the North in 1948 and the U.S. left the South in 1949, the North Koreans invaded South Korea in 1950. There's just not a lot of institutional trust by the UN, the U.S., or South Korea to have foreign forces depart, especially when North Korea and the UN have never signed a peace treaty. The economic and security issues have been long-simmering issues, but what is the cause of the latest North Korea saber rattling? Over the past few months, North Korea has had 5 intercontinental ballistic missile ICBM tests this year, and it is a weapon that has the potential to hit targets within the continental United States. 4 of these launches failed to achieve the desired results, but the last one in November was able to put a spy satellite into orbit. Just like the days of the Soviet Union launched the first satellite, Sputnik, the underlying meaning is that if a country can put a satellite in orbit, it has a rocket that is capable of delivering a nuclear payload, and North Korea is a confirmed nuclear power. The South Koreans suspended part of the 2018 agreement it had with North Korea to ease border tensions, and North Korea subsequently abandoned the entire agreement after the South Korea's suspension. The other concern is that North Korea agreed to supply short-range rockets and artillery shells to Russia for its war in Ukraine in exchange for technology transfers. It is suspected by the South Korean government that the Russians provided the technical assistance to get the North Korean satellite into orbit. The North Koreans would still need to miniaturize a nuclear warhead, create a reentry vehicle, and a guidance system to create a nuclear missile. So Russia apparently only assisted in one part of the steps needed for a nuclear-capable ICBM. It is most likely not the Russians' plan to provide advanced nuclear technology to the North Koreans, since it would be considered too escalatory to the U.S. and against Chinese long-term interests. The concern is that the U.S. provides ever more sophisticated weapons to the Ukrainians in their war against Russia. Would the Russians be willing to up the ante? It is in the Russian interest to cause disruption on the world stage and keep the U.S. distracted in another part of the world, even if it is not in the favor of Russia's ally, China. Of course, this also gives the Russians leverage with China to support its war aims in Ukraine if it wants to limit Russian transfers to North Korea. The spy satellite launch has created a response from powers within the region. The U.S., Japan, and South Korea have all formally signed an early missile warning agreement with each other. This allows all three countries to share information with each other in near real time over North Korean missiles. The North Korean actions fallout is a deepening ties between what North Koreans see as their traditional enemies. The South Koreans have also agreed to allow a U.S. nuclear submarine to have a port of call to South Korea as part of a response to North Korea's actions, and this in itself is an escalation. The South Koreans are also reviewing their nuclear policy position with two options. The first is consideration to request the U.S. reintroduce nuclear weapons into South Korea. They were withdrawn after the Cold War. And the other is a consideration of South Korea developing its own nuclear weapons program. This will give South Korea its own nuclear counterbalance to the North, but will outrage the Chinese and most likely be seen unfavorably by the U.S., which would most likely lead to some sanctions against South Korea. The most likely will not be as severe because South Korea is becoming a pivotal advanced arms producer for NATO nations that are increasing military spending to the war on Ukraine. These are the security concerns that have the North Koreans up in arms this time around, as well as the resumption of the annual U.S.-South Korea readiness exercises that have been a focus of many of North Korean protests. The difference this time around is that the escalatory nature of a successful North Korean satellite launch and the North Koreans assisting the Russians in their war in Ukraine. Will the Russians use this threat of technology transfers to the North Koreans to get the West to step back in the weapons that it provides to the Ukrainians? This is another fallout of a large European war destabilizing the world order. The North Koreans' desire for economic aid and security guarantees seems to be a distant goal at best. North Korea has a long history of breaking international agreements when it often interprets the smallest slight against it. This has made the U.S. and its Asian allies suspicious of giving any more concessions to the North Koreans that could endanger South Korean or Japanese security, as well as the memories of the Korean War that has never officially ended. The North Koreans don't want to concede on their security because giving up security would mean risking its desire to be self-sufficient to the point that it's not reliant on others. Both sides are at loggerheads or, quote, cart before the horse situation. As North Korea pushes the nuclear envelope, can this ongoing arrangement be sustained with two sides that deeply distrust each other?